After a long day's work, a young woman grows tired of waiting in Seattle's cold, unrelenting rain. She soon makes a decision she'll forever regret. One girl would soon become countless more as they fell victim to one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the United States, the Green River Killer. As the murder spree raged on, the police became so desperate to catch the killer, they turned to none other than Ted Bundy for help.
There are an infinite number of ways to explain how a man can come to the point where he destroys human life as this person has, killing because he wants to kill.
The young woman waiting in the rain eventually made the decision to abandon her bus stop and attempt to flag down a ride home. Soon, a man offers her a lift, and consistent with the area and times, they agree on another transaction as well.
I think the very first woman I dated on a Pacific highway, I picked her up there and I choked her, but I didn't kill her. I think that was the very first one I choked and never killed her.
Somehow, she survives the attack and narrowly escapes with her life. But so many who come after her won't be quite as lucky. It's the summer of 1982, and the Pacific Avenue South Strip, located near the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, is alive with teenage girls and young women seeking paying dates.
I was paying for sex. We agreed on sex. Sometimes I'd kill them, and sometimes I wouldn't. I had a lot of rage at that time, and that's why I killed these women.
It's quite monumental because the missing juvenile problem is that nobody gives a shit, especially nobody gives a darn about runaway juvenile.
The street workers, all but forgotten, remain trapped in a vicious cycle, and the lifestyle is an exceptionally dangerous one.
As you correctly pointed out, you're dealing with a class of victims who are hard to trace and hard to investigate, who disappear without being reported, whose movements are hard to trace, whose friends are difficult to run down.
Then the work suddenly becomes even more perilous. First, one body is located, then another. Within just a month, the body count has reached 5. These girls and women of the night are disappearing at a frequency that is increasingly alarming.
How did you kill her?
Choked her.
With what?
My arm. When I pick up a woman, I usually date them. We agree on sex, and if she enjoys it, it's she's probably faking it. And I would be on top of her, usually face to face. If I couldn't have a climax, I would have her turn around and I would get her from the back end, penis and vagina, not rectum or anything. Sometimes I'd kill them, sometimes I wouldn't. I had a lot of rage at that time, and that's why I killed these women. I didn't plan on killing them.
A couple of years pass, and the number of missing and murdered women climbs to well over 40.
And there's, like I said, there's upwards of up to 63 people I killed, so they kind of run together sometimes. And I didn't make a list in my mind which ones I killed with a rope, which I killed with my arms.
The sheer number of victims gives insight into how the killer saw the victims as easily dispensable. In his mind, they were objects to be used for his pleasure and nothing more.
Do you think it's possible that this guy could stop?
No, well, unless he got, unless he was born again and he got filled with the Holy Spirit.
But I believe God's forgives you from your sins.
You think he's forgiven you now?
I think he has.
In a very real way, this guy's figured it out by now.
Oh, no.
He figured it out.
He's way ahead of us. I mean, he's so far ahead of us, it's unreal.
It would be nearly 2 harrowing decades before the monster is finally identified. The first victim was recovered on July 15th of 1982. A gruesome discovery. 2 teenage boys had spotted her body floating in Washington State's Green River. Wendy Cofield was just 16 years old when she was killed. She disappeared a week earlier. It was later found that she'd been strangled with an item of her own clothing.
Is it the first one I killed?
Yes.
I don't actually remember where I killed them because I wasn't planning on killing any of them.
It's possible that the killer didn't decide in advance that he was going to kill. It's possible he acted in the moment. It should be noted that impulsivity is a sign of antisocial personality disorder. However, committing murder is likely something that he fantasized about. so the idea was likely something he'd been considering before actually committing the crime. At this point, Wendy's death appeared to be an isolated event. Everyone hoped that was the case, but it would soon prove to be the beginning of a murderous rampage like no other. Then, another body. Deborah Bonner, age 23, was located just a few weeks later. Within a month, the body count quickly climbed to 5, with the discovery of a Marcia Chapman, age 31, Cynthia Hines, age 17, and Opal Mills, just 16 years old, all found at the same Green River dump site.
Maybe I better tell you something about the dump sites. The most prevalent that we had right off the bat was the 5 right in the river.
Mm-hmm. And he dumped them in there for a reason. He dumped them in there. He dumped Caulfield and company in there because he didn't think they'd be found. And he must have had some reason for believing that.
The beautiful area that had once provided a heavenly ambiance had quickly transformed into hell on earth.
So why don't you tell us what you can remember about
Number 4, I think, was Hines.
Okay.
She was the one that was in the river. I don't actually remember where I killed her. So after I first had sex with her and killed her.
So he was returning to the dump site.
He does. He's returning to his dump sites, not just to bring bodies back, but probably in the interim. If he's returning, if only to drive by, he's returning to check those dump sites out after he's dumped the body there. I can almost guarantee it.
How about after we found it?
I don't know. We wouldn't touch it with a 10-mile pole.
He was partially correct in his speculation. The killer was revisiting the scenes. As for the Green River killer's victim, he would later return to her body after work.
Drove down the same way to where the body was, and I drove down further, parked on the side of the road, looked both ways, nobody was watching, and I ran down the hill towards where the trail was, pulled off any clothes that she might have had, had sex with her right there on the spot, put my pants back on, drug her down into the river, got in the river, pushed her down and put 1 or 2 rocks on top of her.
Gary, what's the longest time that it's been after you killed one of these girls that you came back and fucked them?
2-3 days. Until there was a smell or maggots.
The killer may have experienced gratification by reliving the recent murder during his deplorable act, known as necrophilia. Now, brace yourself for what comes next.
In the water right there, I found a rock to put in her vagina.
At what point did you insert the rock in her vagina?
It was after she got in the water, after she was in the water, there's a rock that looked like the size of fitter, and I put it in there. That was about where I put the rock in during that process. That way there I wouldn't try to maybe come back the next day and pull her out of the water and have sex with her after she was in the water for a couple of days. That's the reason for both of them, not to go back to have sex with them, because they had the rock in them. That was one of the reasons.
Why would you want to stop having sex with
Except
her?
I have to lift up the rock. I'd have to get into the water. There's a chance of losing her down the river. I would have the rock in there so I wouldn't have to, and I'd go out and kill another woman.
Why did you have to put the rock in her vagina?
I'm thinking I had to put the rock in the vagina so I wouldn't go back and dig her out of the river and screw her on the bank, put her back in, take all that effort of putting her back in. That's when I put the rock in.
Her arms were floating?
Her arms were not flooring, but they were probably moving.
Was she waving at you?
I might just be getting that from the discovery. No, she wasn't waving at me. No, just waving with any kind of current coming by.
So you put Hines in the river?
Put Hines in the river.
Cynthia was the final victim discarded in the Green River, but she wasn't the last of his victims, not even close. The following month, the body count reached 6 with the finding of Giselle Lovern on September 25, 1982. At just 17 years of age, Giselle could have had a bright future ahead of her. She was exceptionally intelligent and was on her way out of working the streets. She'd planned to call it quits after one more week. She just needed enough money to fund her trip home to California.
You found these first five really quickly. can see he changes. He's obviously not going to use that Green River anymore, at least not for a while. And he's looking for something that's more effective, so he goes back to dry land with number 6. And Lauren is found in September, but still he sticks to these sites.
It seems the killer found a better way to conceal the discarded bodies following his atrocities at the Green River.
Between September of 82 and May of 83, he didn't find anybody. So in his mind, he was effective.
Let's say he's continuing to kill. Okay. He's still in the Seattle area.
Mm-hmm.
And we found these locations out here. What would his next step be?
That was the million-dollar question. And unfortunately, there was just no way to accurately predict the answer. With the passing months came more strangled bodies. By the end of 1982, somewhere around 15 murders had occurred, though only a fraction of the remains of the victims had been located at the time. One of the youngest victims, estimated to be his 15th kill, was Colleen Brockman. She was only 15 years old when she disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1982. And like the others, her story is heart-wrenching. It's said she told a friend that her home life in North Seattle, where she lived with her father and brother, was miserable. However, she didn't elaborate further. Colleen had run away a few times previously, but she always returned home. This time would be much different.
I'm quite sure that was one in Seattle on Christmas, and it was cold, but she needed the money.
Colleen climbed into a truck, having no idea she had just minutes to live.
We got in the back of the truck, having sex on top. I was on top of her, and then she asked me if I would like to have sex in the rear. Maybe it was behind her in the rear. Anal sex. I told her I didn't have like sex in the rear. I don't know if we did or not. And I got behind her, and I thought for sure it was in her vagina. I climaxed, and I think she had some kind of clothes on. And I choked her. She didn't fight too much. I walked her in to a creek there in Jovina. I walked her in some 20 feet, put her on the bank side towards the road. I don't think I went back and had sex. I think I had all of her clothes. But I remember I walked her upstream.
Walked her or drugged her?
Drug her up. Feet first, I think it was feet first or hands first. I don't know, but it was upstream, uphill, next to the stream and the road. If her hands were over her head, I put her that way. If her feet were there, her hands behind her, and left her there.
Describe her. Race, height, weight, age.
She's, I'd say, 14 to 16, maybe at the most 18. Light color hair, the puffiness of her cheeks,
Baby fat.
the baby fat.
Well, this photograph looks like this girl has something on her teeth. Does that look familiar?
To the braces, in.
Colleen's remains weren't located until 18 months after her disappearance. Sadly, it was the braces on her teeth that helped identify the teenage girl. As the months rolled by and the bodies continued to accumulate, the girls and women working the streets lived in fear, always looking over their shoulders. The speculation on the part of law enforcement was endless. Detectives found the level of frustration hard to bear as they raced to identify the assailant. The efforts always proved futile. They were further demoralized each time another body or set of remains was located. The horrifying spree raged on. At its height in 1983, as many as 5 more women would disappear in as short as a month's time. It's estimated that the Green River Killer had already killed approximately 20 of his victims by April of 1983. All the while, law enforcement was absolutely baffled, with no idea on how to stop him, never mind uncover his identity.
What do you think's motivating?
He denied to kill. In its own way, who knows? I mean, in the detailed recesses of his mind, how this particular behavior pattern evolved. There are an infinite number of ways to explain how a man can come to the point where he destroys human life as this person has. You know, he's killing because he wants to kill.
That was just downright killing. I wasn't there to rape her.
On the night of April 30th, 1983, 18-year-old Marie Mulvar was working as a prostitute when she climbed into a truck. Her boyfriend often trailed behind in an attempt to keep her safe, but on this night, he soon lost sight of the vehicle at a traffic signal and wasn't able to find the truck Marie got into. Sadly, Marie would never be seen alive again.
Do you think there's something that we can do to draw him to us, draw him out of the woodwork?
Yes. I think there are a couple of things. This may sound a little bit strange. But I'll offer them to you for what they're worth. There are a couple things that I would say, with what I know here, you find a fresh body. I put that site under surveillance. I wouldn't move in. Now, that sounds a little bit odd to you. I would move in, secure the area, and try to keep everything off, your radios, right? But set up a surveillance network on that area. Now, you might want to move the body under cover of darkness, because let's face it, by the time, if your man comes back to that site, by the time he gets on top of that body, you've already to the point where the body was, you've already got his number, and you're already going to be in on it. The best chance you have of catching this guy red-handed is to get a site where there's a fresh body and stick it out.
Bundy may have felt that he was in a position of authority or even superior to the police, since they'd requested his assistance with the case. This experience was likely a huge boost to his ego. Even so, the theory seemed to make sense, as it's not uncommon for a serial killer to return to the scene of the crime or to the place where they left their victim. Unfortunately, law enforcement was never able to pull it off. How was this monster able to convince each victim that he was harmless, that the transaction was a safe one to engage in?
But my initial impressions was this guy is young. He's, more or less in the same socioeconomic kind of strata that these young women can be associated with, lower middle class, let's say, that he's between 20 and 30, probably closer to 20. He's young, a low-paying job that restricts his movement. He doesn't have a lot of money. He can't move around. My gut reaction is these girls are being approached by somebody who really puts them at ease.
It was true. Police would eventually learn that the killer did have an unassuming appearance. He was fairly young and clean-cut, yet unremarkable. One of the few victims who survived his attack described him as boring and dull, in fact. The serial killer consultant contributed an idea to the detective.
Have you ever sat down and asked these girls, what kind of person do you think the Green River guy is? What does he look like? How old is he? And I'll bet you the guy would turn out to be older, maybe wearing a business suit, or maybe, maybe unshaven. But I bet you the last person they would expect to be the killer would be one of their own peers.
Bundy was most likely spot on, relating to the street worker's assumption of the killer's appearance. Maybe it was the age-old case of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It was no surprise that Bundy was also quite intrigued by the killer's morbid work.
In terms of when your victims disappeared, when they were found, where they were found, it's kind of fascinating watching some of this unfold. But this guy is learning. He's trying to find the best way to dispose of these bodies he can think of.
Bundy may have even been envious of the mysterious Green River killer because he hadn't been caught yet. Maybe it's possible, though, that Bundy and those close to the case overestimated the Green River killer's abilities. Areas of vast wilderness were at his disposal, after all, nearly in his own backyard. He took advantage of his surroundings, and it worked in his favor. And as the investigation continued, the killer tailored his methods as he saw fit.
That's when I started burying them, and when I started taking them out where I wouldn't go back.
You had an urge to go back and have sex with the bodies?
As I went back, I did have an urge, but I didn't do it.
The killer's attention to detail, however, was questionable. When he approached a teenage girl or woman, appearance wasn't much of a deciding factor.
She could have had a mustache, I probably wouldn't have known. I can't remember the faces because after I told him I couldn't look at them anymore.
He may have avoided looking at the faces of the victims in an attempt to dehumanize them. If he didn't see them as real people, maybe the killings were easier to commit. It seems they were all crimes of opportunity. Each victim had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time. The killer also had a conveniently selective memory. He was able to recall minute, insignificant details, while failing to remember those of importance.
Amazing you remember the junk better than you do
It says yes.
wasn't, you know?
It's clear that the killer viewed his victims as unimportant and insignificant. He didn't see them as people. The only thing he cared about was fulfilling his own desires. Through the course of interviews conducted over the killer's eventual arrest, detectives were finally able to get answers to some of the burning questions that had gone unanswered for so many years as they tried to make sense of how he remained at large for so long.
When the crime scene tape was up, did you ever drive by or see the area where they recovered her?
No, I stayed away from those areas. I just didn't want to be, because I've heard sometimes they film people to come in and film everybody like they did with these sites. Because guys like to come back to see where they kill people and they're in the audience. I've heard that.
Through the interviews also came the revelation of another sadistic ritual the ruthless killer took pleasure in. As if taking their lives wasn't enough, he also took from the victims the few things they had.
There's no evidence of
Well,
clothing, there's no jewelry.
why is he doing that?
Mm-hmm.
We keep a minimum amount of evidence. No fibers, no hairs. Doesn't want, he may have a thing for clothes, but more likely, this guy doesn't want to be caught. Leaving a victim nude is the best way to leave the least amount of evidence.
True, but that wasn't the only motivating factor behind leaving the victims bare. The Green River Killer was the epitome of cold and calculating, as you'll see.
Did you take anything from this particular victim, take her clothing or anything?
Every one of them almost I took the clothing because I'm not to wear it or anything like that. It was just because maybe the hatred of the women that I'd like to have sex with no clothes on.
He loathed the women so much that he believed they didn't even deserve their clothes. Maybe this was his effort to inflict even more punishment upon them after their deaths.
I think for whatever reason, however he got to this point of killing prostitutes, it may have been a deliberate determination on his part that these were easy prey. It may be that he had something specifically against teenage prostitutes.
What would you then do with the clothing?
Usually I would either throw it away or if I was throw it out the car when I was driving the truck.
And then there was also the jewelry.
Jewelry I put in 3 or 4 different places.
Why did you take the jewelry from the victims in the first place? What prompted you to take the necklace off or the ring off?
All this time I've never really thought of why I did it. Maybe it was to hurt the victims or something, the woman I killed.
Basically, they die,
They die, I take the
and then
jewelry.
you strip them right away of their jewelry?
Yeah,
And what was the point of that?
just to take it off and put it in my pocket. There's no, I did with almost every one of the bodies.
Like removing earrings off a dead person. Not kind of weird?
It's probably kind of weird to you, but in my state of mind, it was their possessions and now it's mine and that's it.
If you had a ring that was really hard to get off.
I never had a ring that was real hard to get off.
And what would he do with the jewelry he stole from the victims?
Just get rid of it. Throw it into the bathroom or leave it at the airport or just not send
That
it.
doesn't make any sense to me. You think the police are going to think it's just a bad robbery? Taking jewelry?
It'd be a combination. It'd be maybe it's my trademark.
At times, he'd bring the jewelry to work and secretly toss the pieces into the women's restroom, knowing they'd be found. It likely thrilled him that there was a secret that only he was in on. He may have felt superior because he knew the truth, but no one else did. In actuality, it all came down to the fact that he didn't care who ended up with the jewelry.
Why do you even go to the trouble of taking it to work? To the employees trying to give them away
Because
or leave places?
even though they,
Why wouldn't you just throw them out the window with the clothes?
because I wanted them to go to somebody that was not a whore.
The killer's hatred toward his victims was so extreme, killing them still fell short of satisfying his sinister urges. In the years that followed 1983, the frequency of the killings had slowed considerably. Nearly 2 decades after the rampage began in 2001, everything caught up with the Green River Killer. The identity of the ruthless killer, one who had evaded police capture for so long, was shocking He was a 52-year-old truck painter at a commercial manufacturing plant. His name was Gary Ridgway, and that was just the beginning. Over the years, the authorities had this ruthless killer in their sights, almost stopping his murderous rampage, and yet each time he slipped through their fingers to deadly consequences. A brief glimpse into how his deranged world began may help to shed light on the trajectory that landed him in this very seat. There were blatant warning signs well before the violence escalated to murder. In retrospect, two distinct sets of circumstances seem to have contributed to Gary's evolution to evil. For one, it said that his domineering mother behaved inappropriately toward him during his early adolescence. Apparently, young Gary had a history of bedwetting that continued into the onset of his teen years. He would later allege, while speaking to a psychologist, that he could recall his mother washing his genitals after these types of episodes. Perhaps even more disturbing, he divulged that he was sexually attracted to his own mother as a teen, and he fantasized about killing her. In addition, it seems Gary was profoundly affected by a distinct hatred his father had for prostitutes. He openly voiced his resentment of street workers around his family members. Gary bought into this same sentiment and took that animosity to a whole new level. By his teenage years, Gary had developed an innate desire to torture and kill. The first known fatality at Gary's hands was a family cat. This early warning sign indicates that he felt a lack of empathy for another living thing, which is one of the most well-known signs of psychopathy. Gary's violent acts escalated over time, though the victim that followed the cat was still no match for him. He lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods, where he stabbed the child in the abdomen. Miraculously, the child survived. During this time, Gary wasn't performing well in school, and his IQ was estimated to sit somewhere in the low 80s. Not far into adulthood, Gary had immersed himself in the world of adult entertainment workers. Even the contraction of gonorrhea didn't faze him. Interestingly, promiscuity is often a sign of psychopathy. Psychopaths tend to get bored easily, so they may frequently seek out new partners. Through all of his killing years, Gary was able to balance a job, 3 consecutive marriages, and 1 child. The life he led didn't seem consistent with one that a serial killer would lead, and maybe this contributed to his ability to go undetected. He was able to blend in, and though psychopaths do not experience feelings the same way that other people do, they are able to mimic emotions. This helps them manipulate those around them, and it's clear Gary did just that.
When he's doing all this, he can't be conducting normal relationships with people. His whole life is upset. He might find it hard to hold a job, hard to be in relationships with other people.
Yet Gary fooled everyone around him through all the many years of his killings. What follows is an interview he gave after his arrest, where he begins to shed light on how he was able to go undetected for so long.
That day, I went to work like normal. I don't know if it was overtime or not. About 9 o'clock, I was called into the office. I was brought into the office by the plant manager.
Don't let his soft-spoken demeanor fool you. This coward agreed to provide information in order to avoid the very fate that his victims never had a say in: a death sentence.
Well, Gary, what we tried to do based on content of the proffer of the agreement was we'd like to start with is the bodies that are still out there. Every day that goes by, there's a chance that a house could be built on one.
10 to 14 bodies out there that we are unaware of, we have not found. So,
Possibly the most frustrating element of this case is the fact that Gary didn't go completely unnoticed over all those killing years. Encounters with law enforcement became commonplace. In actuality, it wasn't long before he'd landed himself at the top of the potential suspects list. Unfortunately, the evidence to build a case against him had not yet been uncovered, and he continually managed to evade charges. Consequently, more lives were lost. One of Gary's earliest run-ins with law enforcement came about after that catastrophic night that Marie Malvar climbed into his infamous truck, never to be seen again. Though her boyfriend lost track of the vehicle, he was able to locate a truck that closely resembled the one Marie had entered.
What were you driving?
a 1975 Dodge pickup with maroon and primer.
It will come as no surprise that the truck found by Marie's boyfriend happened to be parked in Gary's driveway.
Melbar, it was pretty close to the house. It was only 5 miles away or something.
When did the Des Moines detective come to your house
They came
in relation to Marie Malva?
I was on strike then, and they came the next day or something.
The next day?
Yeah. And they walked right to the house and didn't look, looked around and didn't see anything.
By the time the detective arrived, Marie was long gone. Her remains would not be located until 20 years after her disappearance. Another documented encounter with law enforcement came in 1984. By this time, Gary had made it high on the list of potential suspects. They were privy to his frequent transactions with prostitutes. There was suspicion that he could be the very monster they were looking for, disguised in a mask of mediocrity. However, it came down to the fact that there just wasn't direct evidence to tie him to any of the murders. At least, not yet. He agreed to a polygraph, and the test was administered on May 7th. Upwards of 40 victims had fallen prey to Gary by this time. Approximately half of the deceased had been recovered. And somehow, he passed. No deception was detected. How could this be? Given that polygraphs are notoriously unreliable, however, perhaps Gary had simply figured out how to beat the system.
But maybe the polygraph was too general. I don't know. Maybe he was just, there was something wrong with his mind. There was obviously something wrong with his mind.
What'd you think? What were you doing? What was going through your mind?
Excuse me, I don't know. I didn't. I just was going to take it and thought for sure pass it.
You thought for sure you'd pass it?
Yeah. And I didn't, I don't think what the questions weren't maybe precise enough to, so I don't remember what questions were.
He believed he'd pass for good reason. He'd already managed to get away with so many murders. He may have believed he was too smart to get caught. During the course of one of his many meetings, Gary provided officials with a saliva sample in 1987. Of course, at the time, forensic testing was not yet advanced enough to match saliva with other biological materials from the same individual. The sample was stored along with those obtained from victims until they could be tested without fear of losing the small amounts of evidence they'd managed to preserve over many years. Though few and far between, there were also stories of survival. A few women survived their brushes with death at the hands of the Green River Killer.
Tell me a little bit about the one that got away.
She was a black lady, little heavyset, 5'10", bigger than what I could handle. We walked back to the truck and I apologized to her, and she took her to where I needed to drop her off and dropped her off. She got her money, and she probably used to men beating her up or something, but it didn't. She didn't turn me in, I don't think so.
Sadly, Gary was likely right, considering the dangers in her line of work. Another woman, on the other hand, did go to the police, but not right away. It was over 2 years before she summoned up the courage to contact law enforcement. Rebecca Garday went to the police in December of 1984. She told of the attack that occurred in November of 1982. Gary recalled the assault having been prior to the murder of his first victim that previous July. As he explained previously, the details began to run together. If she'd been attacked in November, then more than 10 victims had already been murdered. As a result of Rebecca having provided information to police, Gary was interviewed a couple months later, in February of 1985. He placed all the blame on Rebecca for the failed encounter.
She bit me and I choked her. And I let her go.
Well, let's back up a little bit, Gary. Did you take your clothes off?
Just my pants.
She went down and started giving you a blowjob.
Yes.
How long into it was it before you say she bit you?
A minute or so.
Tried you reach an orgasm?
No.
You say she bit you. What did you do then?
I pulled it out of her mouth and choked her.
How did you choke her?
From the back.
From the back?
Yeah.
With your hand? Put her in a headlock? Or?
With my arm.
Your arm? Why did you decide to choke her?
Because she bit me. I don't know why.
And you say you choked her for about 15 seconds.
20 seconds. I don't know.
Okay, you say you dated a lot of girls. Has this happened with any others?
No, it hasn't.
But you had no other incidents with no other girls except this one particular one that we're talking about that you choked?
Yes.
What would have happened if she had died?
I don't
Choked
think
her out?
I don't think she would have.
Do you know anything about chokeholds?
No.
Gary likely blamed Rebecca in an attempt to justify his actions to police.
She bit me. I don't know why.
He knew that it's his word against hers, despite the fact that his story didn't make sense. And then came the conclusion reached by the detective.
Gary told me that he hoped that nothing would become of this. However, if it did, that he could understand and it might teach him a lesson to where he would never go out and hire girls again. I recommend that this case be placed in a closed file. We have identified our suspect in the Gardia assault case. Rebecca does not wish to prosecute for the assault. I think her intention was just to identify a possible Green River suspect. Gary should maybe be looked at a little closer, possibly relating to other assaults.
And just like that, Gary had managed to evade law enforcement once again. But eventually, Gary Ridgway was finally caught. The ruthless killer's spree was finally brought to an end, thanks to a forensic technique known as short tandem repeat and the saliva sample obtained in 1987. A genetic profile of the strangler was produced, and he was quickly linked to 4 victims, and that number would grow considerably with time. In December of 2003, Gary was sentenced to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole. In 2011, yet another life sentence was added to the 48 he'd already received, as he pleaded guilty to the 1982 killing of Rebecca Marrero. The actual count of vulnerable teenage girls and women who fell prey to Gary's diabolical undertaking has been projected at somewhere around 80 to 90 victims. Gary is amongst the most prolific American serial killers on record. To this day, there are still sets of unidentified remains and families whose questions have yet to be answered. It's likely that more murders will be linked to Gary as he sits in his jail cell.
Mando arrived. She entered a scene that felt suspended in time. Everything remained as Nancy had left it, yet her absence was palpable. There was a dark stain on the carpet and the bedding from her bed was missing. Upon closer inspection, Amanda noticed what appeared to be blood splatter on the walls. Frantic and shaking, she called 911. The dispatcher received the call with the gravity such situations demand. Amanda reported a missing person, explaining that her mother-in-law had not been seen or heard from, and that blood was visible on the pillow. The presence of over 20 wedding guests on the property immediately complicated the situation, transforming a quiet family emergency into a sprawling investigation. Among the first to arrive at the scene was Reserve Detective Clinton Cole of the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office. A veteran deputy, Cole felt an immediate sense of unease as he drove down El Faro Road. Upon arriving, he met with the responding deputies who confirmed that the circumstances were highly suspicious. Detective Cole walked toward Nancy's cottage. The door stood open, and there were no signs of forced entry. Inside, the red flags were numerous and unmistakable. 2 large bloodstains marred the floor. On a bench nearby lay Nancy's purse, her car keys, her cellular telephone, and her electronic tablet. Both of her vehicles remained parked outside. On the bed, a beige pillow bore a significant bloodstain, and further blood splatter was visible on the headboard, the cabinet, and the back wall. It was clear to Cole that Nancy had been taken against her will, and that her cottage was a primary crime scene. As investigators began securing the property, a critical discovery was made. Several miles away, an officer with the California Highway Patrol contacted the sheriff's office to report that bedding and clothing had been located on La Ponza Road, approximately 6 to 7 miles from Nancy's residence. Detective Cole and his team went to the location. Scattered along the roadside were a pillow, a woman's dress, a pair of shorts, a shirt, and bedding. The gingham-type print of the sheets matched the remaining linens in Nancy's cottage. The items bore stains that appeared to be blood. Amanda later confirmed that the clothing and bedding belonged to her mother. The realization that Nancy had likely been wrapped in her own bedding and transported, either severely injured or deceased, lent a terrible urgency to the search. The immediate challenge for investigators was the sheer number of potential suspects. The wedding guests staying in the Victorian home and the guest house represented over 20 individuals who had ready access to the property. Detective Cole and his colleagues recognized the necessity of interviewing every single person. The process was chaotic. The property was secured under a search warrant, preventing guests, some of whom had small children, from entering the home to retrieve diapers or food. The bride was emotional and horrified, unable to comprehend how such an event could occur while she and her bridesmaids were sleeping just a wall away from Nancy's apartment. The bride explained that she had retired to bed around 11:15 in the evening, inserting her earplugs, as was her habit, and had heard nothing. The rest of the wedding party had returned from a rehearsal dinner at a local winery around 10:30 and were asleep by midnight. There was, however, one wedding guest whose movements could not be initially verified. He had not attended the rehearsal dinner, claiming he had remained at the house alone. When questioned, he became increasingly uncooperative, a behavior that raised immediate concerns for the detectives. Normally, individuals with nothing to hide cooperate fully with law enforcement. Detectives traveled to the guest's home in Northern California to conduct a follow-up interview. Away from the tension of the active crime scene, the man was cooperative, explaining that his initial resistance was due to frustration rather than guilt. His wife provided photographs from her telephone confirming he had indeed attended the dinner. The guest also voluntarily provided a sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid, which eventually cleared him of any involvement. With the wedding party ruled out, investigators turned their attention to other individuals who had accessed the property. Because Nancy was preparing to sell Paradise Ranch, she had hired several independent contractors to perform maintenance, including painters, plumbers, and carpenters. Among the names found in Nancy's electronic tablet was Carlo Fuentes Flores, a local painter. When contacted by Detective Cole, Fuentes Flores was polite and helpful, recalling that Nancy had been present on the Thursday before her disappearance and had kindly given him a tamale as he worked. He claimed to have seen nothing unusual. Amanda also provided the name of Sean Bloom, a general contractor who had recently worked on the house. Their professional relationship had ended. Contentiously, Nancy had fired him due to dissatisfaction with his work, and he had threatened legal action to secure payment. Bloom initially refused to provide a sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid without consulting his attorney, which temporarily heightened suspicion. However, he later relented and submitted a sample which did not match the evidence found at the scene. Attention also turned briefly to Nancy's son, Chad. The relationship between mother and son had been strained for several years, largely due to differences over religion. They had exchanged text messages on the night of her disappearance, and Chad initially refused to cooperate with the investigation. Detectives placed him under surveillance, eventually retrieving discarded beer bottles from his truck to obtain a sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid. He, too, was cleared. By the end of the first week, the investigation had stalled. There were no active leads, and the public was growing anxious. The sheriff's department decided to utilize a relatively new investigative tool, a Google geofence search warrant. The technique, which had rarely been used in California at the time, allowed investigators to draw a virtual boundary around Nancy's property and request data from Google regarding any cellular devices that active within that boundary during a specific time frame. The timeline was established by a 911 call that had appeared on Nancy's telephone bill at 12:17 in the morning. On Saturday, the 5th of May, the call had lasted for 0 seconds, indicating it had been terminated almost instantly. When the geofence data returned from Google, it provided a series of device numbers, which act as digital fingerprints. While the wedding guests' devices were visible and accounted for, detectives noticed a single device that pinged inside Nancy's studio at 1:33 and again at 1:52 in the morning. This was the precise window in which investigators believed the abduction had occurred. A subsequent warrant was served to obtain the subscriber information for that device. In November, 6 months after Nancy's disappearance, the name associated with the device was returned: Carlo Fuentes Flores. The revelation shocked investigators. Fuentes Flores was a family man with no prior criminal history in either the United States or Mexico. Those who had employed him described him as polite, professional, and exceptionally skilled. Yet the digital evidence placed his telephone inside Nancy's cottage at 2 in the morning. Detectives began a deep dive into Fuentes Flores' digital history. His Google search queries revealed a secret, darker persona. He had frequently searched for pornography involving older women and had sought out escorts in various cities. He also recorded numerous videos of his sexual encounters on his telephone. This duality contrasted sharply with the polite painter who read scriptures with Nancy. To secure an arrest, investigators needed physical evidence linking Fuentes Flores to the crime scene. They had retrieved an unknown male deoxyribonucleic acid profile from the bloody handprint on the pillow in Nancy's room.
A
Surveillance team followed Fuentes Flores to a local restaurant where they retrieved a plastic beverage bottle he had discarded in a public trash receptacle. The laboratory analysis confirmed a match. The deoxyribonucleic acid on the bottle belonged to the same individual who had left the bloody handprint on Nancy's pillow. On the morning of the interrogation, Detective Cole and his partner, David, sat across from Fuentes Flores. They began by asking routine questions about his painting work at the ranch, establishing his familiarity with the property. Fuentes Flores claimed he did not know where Nancy stayed and had only heard of her disappearance from his employer. Detectives then presented the physical evidence, explaining that they had his deoxyribonucleic acid from the crime scene. Fuentes Flores, Diminer Chand. Visibly, he admitted he had made a mistake, claiming he had returned to the property late at night to retrieve a ladder and had accidentally struck Nancy with his truck as he backed up. He claimed he had carried her inside to help her and that she had collapsed. Detectives pressed further, pointing out the blood splatter and the implausibility of his story. Fuentes Flores then admitted to assaulting Nancy, claiming he was intoxicated. When asked if he would show them where her body was, he agreed. The journey from the station took over an hour, leading into the arid, remote landscape of the Carrizo Plain. Fuentes Flores appeared subdued, expressing regret. After stopping at several incorrect locations, he pointed toward a small, out-of-place circle of stacked rocks in the dry grass. There, investigators discovered Nancy's remains, which had been severely scattered by wildlife. Detective Cole felt a profound sadness for the family, mingled with anger at the callousness with which Nancy had been left in the wilderness. Back in the interrogation room, Fuentes Flores disclosed the full truth. He had entered Nancy's cottage around 12:15 in the morning with the intention of assaulting her. When she resisted and attempted to call 911, he struck her, assaulted her, and ultimately suffocated her with a pillow. He then wrapped her body in her bedding, loaded her into his truck, and drove to the Carrizo Plain. Fuentes Flores wrote an apology letter to Nancy's family and his own, and was subsequently arrested. Rather than proceed to a lengthy trial, he eventually agreed to a slow plea, preserving his right to appeal while allowing the judge to review the evidence. In January of 2022, the judge found him guilty of first-degree murder with a special circumstance of rape during the commission of a burglary. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Amanda and her family, the recovery of Nancy's remains brought a measure of peace, allowing them to hold a beautiful memorial service in a local vineyard. Amanda continues to ride her mother's horse, Montana, keeping her mother's memory alive in the quiet hills of Paso Robles. Chapter 2: The Illusion of Grief. Summit County, Utah, is a place of dramatic elevation and quiet wealth. The Mountains near Park City are home to ski resorts, sprawling estates, and families who seek refuge in the crisp alpine air. It is an environment where success is often measured by the grandeur of one's home and the presentation of a perfect life. In the early morning hours of March 4th, 2022, that presentation shattered. At approximately 3 in the morning, Corey Richens placed a desperate call to 911. She reported that her husband, 39-year-old Eric Richens, was cold to the touch and not breathing. When emergency responders arrived at the home in Camas, they found Eric on his back in the master bedroom. Deputies and paramedics attempted cardiopulmonary resuscitation, utilizing a mechanical chest compression device that filled the room with a rhythmic, mechanical sound. Corey stood nearby, visibly distraught, explaining to deputies that she and her husband had been celebrating a successful real estate transaction hours earlier. She claimed she had prepared a mixed drink for him, after which she went to sleep in their son's room because the child was experiencing night terrors. When she returned to her bedroom, she found Eric unresponsive. The responding medical professionals noted an unusual amount of blood near Eric's mouth during resuscitation efforts, leading to an initial theory that he may have suffered a brain aneurysm. Eric was a healthy, athletic man who coached youth soccer and worked on his family's cattle ranch, making a sudden death highly unexpected. He was officially declared deceased at 3:58 in the morning. In the days following Eric's death, the community rallied around Corey and her 3 young sons. Corey presented herself as a devastated widow, navigating the profound grief of her children. Finding a lack of literary resources to help young children cope with the sudden loss of a parent, Corey announced she had written a children's book titled Are You With Me? The book, which she self-published, was written from the perspective of a child, wondering if his deceased father was still present during important life milestones, such as soccer games and camping trips. The second half of the book provided reassuring answers from the father's perspective. Corey dedicated the book to her husband, portraying their family as a harmonious unit of 5. She appeared on local television programs, including Good Things Utah, where she spoke eloquently about the challenges of grieving as a young widow and the importance of supporting her children. However, behind this public facade of maternal devotion and entrepreneurial success, a far more complex reality was emerging. Investigators with the Summit County Sheriff's Office, led by Detective Jeff O'Driscoll, were conducting a routine investigation into the unexpected death. The initial toxicology report from the medical examiner's office returned with a shocking result. Eric Richens had died from a lethal dose of fentanyl. The concentration of the drug in his system was 5 times the amount required to kill an average adult. Furthermore, the examiner determined that the substance was illicitly manufactured fentanyl rather than a medical-grade pharmaceutical. Because Eric had no history of substance abuse, the death was immediately treated as a homicide. Investigators began examining the financial and personal lives of the couple. Eric had been a highly successful partner in C&E Masonry, a multi-million-dollar stone masonry business. Corey had established her own real estate business, K. Richens Realty, which focused on acquiring, renovating, and flipping residential properties. Her ambitions were grand. She had recently entered into a contract to purchase a massive, unfinished estate in Midway, Utah, valued at nearly $3 million. She envisioned converting the property into a luxury event venue. To fund her projects, Corey had relied on high-interest hard money loans, accumulating substantial debt. In 2020, Eric discovered that Corey had secretly taken out a $250,000 line of credit against their family home, which he solely owned. This discovery caused a severe rift in the marriage. Eric consulted a divorce attorney and privately altered his estate plan, placing his business, the home, and his assets into a trust managed by his sister, Katie. The beneficiaries of the trust were his 3 sons, effectively ensuring that Corey would not have direct access to his estate in the event of his death or a divorce. The tension between the families erupted 2 days after Eric's death, when Corey attempted to have a locksmith open a safe in the home to retrieve Eric's will. Eric's sister, Amy, intervened. A physical altercation ensued, resulting in Corey being charged with simple assault, to which she later pleaded no contest. As the criminal investigation intensified, detectives obtained search warrants for Corey's electronic devices and financial records. They discovered she was facing impending financial ruin, with outstanding debts totaling millions of dollars. Her dream of owning the Midway mansion was crumbling, and she had allegedly defrauded her close friend, Chelsea Barney, of $45,000 in a real estate transaction, leading to Chelsea's eviction and financial loss. Furthermore, investigators uncovered a history of suspicious illnesses suffered by Eric. In 2019, during a trip to Greece, Eric became violently ill after consuming a drink prepared by Corey. He contacted his sister, expressing fear that his wife had attempted to poison him. On Valentine's Day in 2022, approximately 3 weeks before his death, Corey purchased a breakfast sandwich for Eric from a local bakery. Shortly after taking a bite, Eric suffered a severe systemic reaction requiring the use of his son's epinephrine auto-injector and a large dose of antihistamines. He texted a friend later that day, stating that he believed his wife had tried to poison him. Detectives focused on identifying the source of the fentanyl. A review of Corey's cellular telephone records revealed frequent communication with Carmen Lauber, a woman who had previously cleaned properties for Corey's real estate business and who possessed a criminal record involving narcotics. When investigators executed a search warrant at Lauber's residence, they discovered drug paraphernalia and a copy of Eric Richens' obituary taped to a mirror. Facing significant criminal charges, Lauber agreed to cooperate with the state. She admitted that Corey had asked her to procure strong pain medication for an investor with a back injury. Lauber claimed she had purchased fentanyl pills from a local dealer, Robert Crozier, and delivered them to Corey on 2 separate occasions in February. Armed with this information, authorities arrested Corey Richens on May 8, 2023, charging her with aggravated murder and possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. While held in the Summit County Jail, Corey's actions continued to draw scrutiny. During a routine search of her cell, deputies discovered a handwritten 4-page letter hidden in her mattress. The letter, which began with the phrase, "Walk the dog," was addressed to her mother and contained detailed instructions. For her brother, Ronnie, Corey instructed her brother to testify that Eric had obtained pain pills and fentanyl from Mexico through ranch workers, an attempt to explain the presence of the drug in his system. The prosecution filed additional charges of witness tampering, arguing the letter was a clear attempt to manufacture false testimony. Further digital forensic analysis revealed that Corey had been engaged in a long-term romantic affair with Josh Grossman, a handyman she had employed. The two had exchanged daily text messages, with Corey expressing a desire to be with Grossman and wishing her husband would go away so they could build a life together at the Midway Mansion. In one message sent less than 48 hours before Eric's death, Corey urged Grossman to hang in until Friday, promising that life would be different. Grossman later testified that during a drive after Eric's death, Corey had asked him if he had ever killed anyone during his military service in Iraq and how it had made him feel. In March of 2024, prosecutors amended the charges to include attempted murder in connection with the Valentine's Day sandwich incident. Corey maintained her innocence, releasing an audio statement claiming she was being falsely accused and had always protected her husband. The trial commenced in a small courthouse near Park City. The prosecution presented a compelling case detailing Corey's immense financial liabilities, her secret search history regarding lethal doses of fentanyl and luxury prisons, her affair, and the testimony of Carmen Lauber and Josh Grossman. In a surprising legal maneuver, after the prosecution rested its 13-day case, Corey's defense team chose to rest without calling a single witness or presenting evidence. The defense argued that the state had failed to prove how the fentanyl was administered to Eric, emphasizing the lack of physical evidence within the home. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. They returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts, including aggravated murder. Corey Richens was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her 3 sons were placed in the custody of Eric's sister, ensuring they would be raised in the environment their father had sought to secure for them. Chapter 3: The Alleyway Ambush. Evansville, Indiana, is a working-class city situated along the Ohio River. It is a place where neighbors know one another and where public servants, particularly firefighters and police officers, are held in high esteem. On a freezing night in February 2019, that sense of security was shattered. Robbie Dorr, a respected 47-year-old firefighter and 28-year veteran of the Evansville Fire Department, returned to his home on Oakley Street after completing a 12-hour shift. As his truck pulled into the driveway, his wife, Elizabeth, known as Becky, was inside preparing dinner. Within moments of his arrival, the quiet of the neighborhood was interrupted by 5 rapid popping sounds. Becky placed a frantic call to 911, reporting that her husband had been shot and was lying in the driveway. Emergency responders arrived quickly, finding Robbie with a catastrophic gunshot wound to the head. Despite immediate cardiopulmonary resuscitation efforts, he was pronounced deceased at the scene. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Evansville community. Robbie was a beloved figure, known for his bravery and his dedication to training younger firefighters. His fellow firefighters escorted his body to the coroner's office in a solemn procession of fire engines. Initially, investigators from the Evansville Police Department were faced with a complete mystery. There were no shell casings found at the scene, and neighbors reported only the sound of gunfire without seeing any vehicles or suspects. The lack of forced entry or signs of a struggle suggested a targeted ambush. Detectives began constructing a timeline, utilizing a whiteboard to map out Robbie's social circle, his family, and his colleagues. They discovered that while Robbie appeared to have a harmonious life, his 6-month marriage to Becky was fraught with tension. Robbie was Becky's 6th husband. The relationship had developed rapidly, but financial strains soon emerged. Robbie worked multiple jobs, including managing a local restaurant, to support Becky's desire to remain at home. However, Becky had accumulated significant debt, purchasing a new vehicle and home furnishings shortly after their marriage. Furthermore, Robbie had expressed deep insecurities regarding Becky's behavior. He confided in friends and family that Becky was secretive with her cellular telephone, frequently deleting her text messages and call logs. He suspected she was engaging in infidelity. During a search of the home, investigators located a note written by Robbie to Becky, expressing his pain and distrust over her secretive communications. The forensic analysis of the projectiles retrieved from Robbie's body provided a critical clue. The ammunition was a unique mixture of jacketed bullets, ball ammunition, and plastic wadding. A firearms expert identified the weapon as a Taurus Judge, a specialized revolver capable of firing both shotgun shells and traditional handgun cartridges from the same cylinder. Detectives learned that a Taurus Judge had recently been reported stolen from a local pawn shop. The employee suspected of the theft was Larry Richmond Jr. Larry Jr. was the son of Larry Richmond Sr., a man with a significant criminal history. Larry Sr. had previously served 20 years in prison for a homicide conviction. Investigators discovered that Larry Sr. was currently in a romantic relationship with Becky's sister, Amanda, and lived nearby. On the night of Robbie's funeral, police executed a coordinated operation, bringing Becky, Amanda, Larry Sr. and Larry Jr. in for simultaneous interviews. Becky initially maintained that she had been inside the home cooking when she saw Robbie's headlights and heard the gunfire. However, a digital download of her cellular telephone records revealed a critical discrepancy. Becky had deleted a 4-minute and 18-second phone call received just 5 minutes before her 911 call. When confronted with the records, Becky became evasive. She eventually admitted that the deleted call was from Larry Richmond Sr. She claimed she deleted the call because she feared it would look suspicious, denying any romantic involvement with him. Meanwhile, Larry Richmond Jr. admitted to stealing the Taurus Judge from the pawn shop and delivering it to his father. Surveillance footage from a neighboring property showed Larry Richmond Sr. carrying a container behind his garage on the night of the murder. Officers executed a search warrant at his property, utilizing shovels to excavate the backyard. They recovered a buried plastic container filled with firearms, although the specific murder weapon was not among them. The high-tech crime unit spent months working to bypass the security encryption on Larry Sr.'s iPhone. When they successfully extracted the data, they discovered highly detailed location coordinates. On the night of the murder, Larry Sr.'s telephone was active in the immediate vicinity of Robbie's home. The data showed him moving through the alleyway behind the property, waiting for Robbie to arrive. His telephone was powered off minutes before the shooting and powered back on at a nearby gas station shortly after. Further witness testimony from a jailhouse informant revealed that Larry Sr. had confessed to the murder while in custody, stating that he and Becky had planned to eliminate Robbie so Becky could claim his firefighter pension and estate. In October of 2020, both Becky Fox Dorr and Larry Richmond Sr. were charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Becky's trial proceeded first. The prosecution presented the deleted call records, the testimony of her son regarding her immediate inquiries about Robbie's pension, and the digital location data linking Larry Sr. to the scene. Larry Richmond Jr. also testified, confirming he had witnessed his father and Becky kissing behind Robbie's home prior to the murder. The jury found Becky Fox Dorr guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 90 years in prison. Larry Richmond Sr.'s trial followed, despite his defense claiming he was visiting his mother on the night of the incident. The circumstantial and digital evidence proved overwhelming. The jury found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Evansville Fire Department dedicated a new fire engine in Robbie's honor, ensuring his legacy of service would continue to protect the community he loved. Chapter 4: The Submerged Truth. The city of Willard, Ohio, is a traditional railroad town located in Huron County. It is a quiet, close-knit community where generations of families have lived and worked alongside the tracks. On a chilly morning in October 2001, a local landowner's son noticed an unusual object in the center of a deep farm pond. Upon closer inspection, He realized it was the roof of a vehicle submerged in the water. Sheriff's deputies and a dive team arrived at the scene. Divers entered the water and confirmed that a white Chevrolet Camaro was resting on the muddy bottom of the pond. Inside the vehicle, on the passenger side, they discovered the remains of 26-year-old Regina Roe Hicks. The discovery devastated the community. Regina was a beloved mother known for her vibrant personality and her devotion to her 4-year-old son, Montana. She had recently filed for divorce from her husband, Paul Hicks, a railroad foreman. The physical evidence within the vehicle immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Regina's body was positioned with her feet wedged under the passenger side dashboard, a position that was physically inconsistent with her having been the driver. The driver's seat was pushed back to accommodate a much larger person, and the driver's side window was open, suggesting the operator had escaped through the window after driving the vehicle into the water. Furthermore, Regina's boots and clothing were caked with mud, suggesting she had been dragged across the ground before being placed in the vehicle. The autopsy revealed 3 blunt force injuries to her scalp, which were sufficient to incapacitate her, and water in her lungs, indicating she was unconscious but still breathing when the vehicle entered the pond. Investigators focused on Paul Hicks. The couple's divorce had been highly contentious, centered on a custody dispute over Montana. Paul wished to avoid paying child support and had expressed anger over Regina's demands. Paul claimed he had been waiting at a friend's house for Regina to pick up their son and that she never arrived. He suggested she had vanished due to lifestyle choices, an assertion her family vehemently denied. Although Paul failed a scheduled polygraph examination due to intoxication, investigators lacked the physical evidence or confessions necessary to secure an indictment, and the case grew cold. 14 years later, in June of 2015, a catastrophic house fire occurred in Goshen, Ohio, a suburb of Cincinnati. The property belonged to Paul Hicks, who had purchased it as an investment. The fire was quickly determined to be arson, with multiple gas cans discovered inside the home. Paul's home surveillance system, preserved inside a fireproof safe, captured 2 individuals wearing protective suits entering the home and pouring gasoline. One of the individuals, possessing long blonde hair, paused and looked directly into the camera. Paul immediately accused his ex-girlfriend, Kelly, with whom he was engaged in a bitter custody battle over their young son. He provided cellular telephone records showing over 90 harassing calls from her number on the night of the fire. Kelly was arrested, but she steadfastly maintained her innocence. A private investigator and civil attorney representing Paul's insurance company began a detailed investigation. They discovered that the phone calls had been spoofed, utilizing a digital application to mimic Kelly's number, and that the calls had originated from an internet protocol address associated with a woman dating Paul. Further investigation revealed that a blonde wig and a custom-made latex mask of Kelly's face had been purchased online using the girlfriend's financial records. The photographs used to manufacture the mask had been retrieved from Paul's social media accounts. The evidence indicated Paul had orchestrated the arson to frame Kelly and secure custody of their son. As Paul faced arson and insurance fraud charges in Claremont County, the publicity surrounding the case caught the attention of Ashley Ford, a prominent true crime podcaster in Ohio. Ford began a detailed investigation into the 2001 disappearance and death of Regina Hicks, releasing a series of episodes that questioned the initial police investigation and focused on Paul's history of domestic control. The renewed public interest prompted the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation to reopen the cold case. Detectives focused on Steve Gates, Paul's lifelong friend who had provided his alibi in 2001. Fearing prosecution and facing the pressure of the renewed investigation, Gates agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for transactional immunity. Gates confessed that on the night of the murder, Regina had arrived at his property to pick up Montana. An argument ensued between Regina and Paul in the driveway. Gates claimed he retired to his barn to work on a tractor, and when he returned, he saw Regina's body slumped in the passenger seat of her Camaro. Paul informed Gates that Regina was dead and threatened him into compliance. Gates followed Paul as Paul drove Regina's Camaro to the farm pond, drove it into the water, and escaped through the window. Gates then drove Paul back to his residence. With Gates' testimony and the pattern of behavior established by the 2015 arson case, authorities arrested Paul Hicks in April of 2025, charging him with murder and kidnapping. The trial took place in Huron County. The prosecution presented Steve Gates' detailed testimony, which was corroborated by Regina's sister and friends who testified to Paul's history of control and abuse. Paul's sister testified that on the night of Regina's disappearance, she returned home to find Paul's muddy clothing floating in the bathtub and scratches on his face. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Paul Hicks was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Regina's family finally achieved the closure they had sought for over 2 decades, honoring her memory as a loving mother whose life was unjustly cut short. The Pass of the Oaks. The rolling topography of Central California possesses a quiet, fairy tale quality that has long captured the imagination of travelers. Nestled halfway between the urban centers of San Francisco and Los Angeles lies the community of Paso Robles, a name derived from the Spanish designation El Paso de Robles, which translates to the Pass of the Oaks. It is a landscape defined by dramatic contrasts, where golden hillsides are punctuated by the deep green of ancient oak trees and orderly rows of vineyards stretch across the valleys. 4 generations, this region was defined by cattle ranching, agriculture, and equestrian traditions, but in recent decades, it has transformed into a prestigious destination for wine enthusiasts. The beauty of the scenery suggests a peaceful, untroubled existence, yet down a secluded gravel path known as Faro Road, a dark mystery would unfold, shattering the rural tranquility. At the center of this rural landscape was a property known as Paradise Ranch. Purchased in the year 2006 by Robert and Nancy Woodrum, the ranch-style property began as a modest dwelling in need of significant renovation. Robert, a skilled building contractor, worked alongside his wife to transform the estate, eventually constructing a handsome two-story Victorian residence complete with wraparound porches and a weeping willow tree that shaded the driveway. Following the death of her husband, Nancy decided to reside in a smaller, detached cottage on the property while utilizing the spacious main house as a vacation rental for travelers seeking a quiet getaway in the hills. Nancy Woodrum was a well-known and beloved figure within the Paso Robles community. At 62 years of age, she operated a popular downtown beauty salon called The Strand, where she was known for her warmth, generosity, and remarkable ability to connect with clients. Her daughter, Amanda, shared her mother's passion for cosmetology and worked alongside her, developing a deep bond that extended beyond their professional lives. In addition to their shared profession, Nancy and Amanda were united by their love of horses and their devout faith as members of the Jehovah's Witnesses. For Nancy, the hope of a restored paradise on earth, a central tenet of her beliefs, was reflected in the very name she chose for her home. She was an active, spirited woman who found solace in riding her horse, Montana, across the rolling hills of the ranch. On Friday, the 4th of May, 2018, a wedding party consisting of more than 20 guests checked into Paradise Ranch. The group, which included the bride, her bridesmaids, and close friends, had selected the estate for its rustic charm and proximity to a local vineyard where the ceremony was to take place. Nancy welcomed the guests with her characteristic hospitality, introducing herself to the bride and offering a warm embrace before retiring to her nearby cottage. It was a festive weekend, filled with the busy preparations and joyful anticipation that precede a wedding. The transition from celebration to alarm occurred on the morning of Saturday, the 5th of May. Amanda received a telephone call from a member of her mother's congregation, expressing concern that Nancy had uncharacteristically failed to appear for a scheduled morning Bible study. Knowing her mother's unwavering dedication to her religious commitments, Amanda immediately sensed that something was amiss. She contacted a neighbor, requesting that they visit the cottage to check on Nancy's welfare. The neighbor's report was chilling. Upon arriving at the cottage, the neighbor found the front door standing wide open and the television blaring loudly, yet there was no sign of Nancy. Amanda rushed to the property, her apprehension mounting with every mile. When she stepped inside the cottage, she confronted a scene that was both ordinary and deeply disturbing. Nancy's purse, car keys, cellular phone, and tablet were resting on a bench near the door, and both of her vehicles remained parked outside. However, a closer examination of the living space revealed signs of a violent struggle. A significant dark stain was visible on the carpet, and the bedding had been entirely removed from the mattress. Upon inspecting the walls, Amanda observed a pattern of dark splatters that appeared to be blood. Frantic and trembling, she contacted emergency services, dialing 911 to report her mother missing under highly suspicious circumstances. The emergency dispatch call initiated a rapid response from the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office. Senior Deputy Degnan and Reserve Detective Clinton Cole were among the first investigators to arrive at the scene. Detective Cole, a seasoned law enforcement officer, immediately recognized that the cottage was not merely the site of a disappearance, but an active crime scene. The lack of forced entry suggested that Nancy may have been surprised in the night or had opened the door to someone she recognized. The presence of blood on a beige pillow, along with significant blood spatter on the headboard, the back wall, and a nearby cabinet, indicated that a severe physical assault had occurred. Within the bedroom, the evidence spoke clearly to the investigators. Nancy Woodrum had been subjected to violence and taken from her home against her will. As forensic technicians began documenting the cottage, a crucial discovery was made several miles away. An officer with the California Highway Patrol contacted the Sheriff's Department to report that discarded bedding and clothing had been spotted along La Ponza Road, approximately 6 or 7 miles from the ranch. Detective Cole and other investigators traveled to the location at a rural road winding through the foothills. Scattered in the brush, they located a pillow, a sheet with a gingham print, a woman's dress, a pair of shorts, and a shirt. The gingham pattern matched the remaining bedding in Nancy's cottage, and the clothing items were later identified by Amanda as belonging to her mother. The presence of bloodstains on the discarded sheets suggested that Nancy had been wrapped in the bedding and transported from the property, either severely injured or deceased. The investigation was immediately confronted with an overwhelming challenge: a massive pool of potential suspects. More than 20 wedding guests were staying in the main house and the adjacent guest cottage, situated mere yards from Nancy's residence. The remote nature of Paradise Ranch meant that access to the property was limited, making the wedding party a logical starting point for inquiries. Investigators secured a search warrant for the entire estate, halting the wedding preparations and transforming the vacation rental into a secured zone. Detective Cole and his colleagues began the arduous task of interviewing every individual on the property. The atmosphere was chaotic and emotionally charged, as guests, some of whom had traveled with young children, found themselves restricted from entering the house to retrieve essential items like diapers and food. The bride was overwhelmed with distress, her long-planned wedding day overshadowed by a horrific mystery unfolding on the very grounds where she was staying. Despite the proximity of the wedding guests, none reported hearing anything unusual during the night. The bride explained that she had returned from a rehearsal dinner at a local winery around 10:30 on Friday evening and had gone to bed shortly after 11, inserting earplugs to ensure a restful night. Other guests reported similar timelines, with most retiring by midnight. However, one guest became a focus of intense scrutiny. This individual, who was not a member of the formal wedding party, was unable to definitively account for his whereabouts during the rehearsal dinner, suggesting he may have remained alone on the property. During initial interviews, this guest exhibited defensive and uncooperative behavior, a reaction that stood in stark contrast to the cooperative attitude typically displayed by innocent individuals seeking to resolve the ambiguity. Detectives traveled to his residence in Northern California for a follow-up interview. On this occasion, the man was highly cooperative, and his wife provided photographs demonstrating that he had indeed attended the rehearsal dinner, thereby resolving the timeline inconsistency. Furthermore, the guest voluntarily provided a sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid, which ultimately excluded him from involvement in the crime. As the wedding guests were systematically cleared, investigators shifted their attention to other individuals who had recently accessed the property. Because Nancy had recently decided to place Paradise Ranch on the market to pursue her religious ministry full-time, numerous contractors, painters, and plumbers had been performing repairs on the estate. Among them was Sean Bloom, a general contractor who had recently been dismissed by Nancy following a heated dispute over the quality of his work and outstanding payments. The disagreement had been contentious, with Bloom sending text messages threatening legal action if he was not paid immediately. Bloom was interviewed extensively by detectives. He was transparent about his dislike for Nancy and his frustration regarding the business dispute, but he vehemently denied any involvement in her disappearance. After initial hesitation, Bloom consulted with his legal counsel and voluntarily submitted a deoxyribonucleic acid sample. The laboratory analysis subsequently cleared him of any connection to the physical evidence found at the scene. Investigators also examined Nancy's family dynamics, specifically her relationship with her son, Chad. The relationship had been strained for several years due to personal differences, and they had not spoken face-to-face in a significant period. However, on the night of her disappearance, Nancy had reached out to Chad via text message in an attempt to find common ground. Chad's defensive posture and initial refusal to provide a genetic sample made him a temporary person of interest. Investigators conducted surveillance on Chad, eventually retrieving discarded beer bottles from his vehicle after an arrest for an open container violation. The genetic material obtained from the bottles did not match the evidence from the crime scene, effectively clearing him of suspicion. By the end of the first month, the investigation had reached a critical impasse. Meticulous searches of the surrounding foothills, riverbeds, and rural roads, using search and rescue teams, tracking dogs, and helicopters had yielded no sign of Nancy. The public began to express frustration, perceiving a lack of progress in a case that had deeply unsettled the community. The detectives, however, remained dedicated to the pursuit of justice, working daily to identify new avenues of inquiry. It was during this period of stagnation that the investigative team decided to employ a sophisticated and relatively new technology known as Google geofencing. This technique involved establishing a virtual perimeter around Nancy's cottage and requesting that Google identify any cellular devices that had recorded location data within that boundary during a highly specific time frame. The timeline had been narrowed significantly thanks to a critical discovery in Nancy's telephone records. An attempted 911 call had been initiated from her phone at 12:17 in the morning on Saturday, May 5th, but had been disconnected after 0 seconds, indicating it had been terminated. Almost instantly, the geofence search warrant, one of the first of its kind utilized in the state of California, produced a breakthrough. While the devices belonging to the wedding guests were accounted for, the data revealed a single, unidentified cellular device active within the immediate vicinity of Nancy's cottage at 1:33 and 1:52 in the morning. This was the precise window during which investigators believed Nancy had been taken from her home. The discovery initiated a second phase of legal process to obtain the subscriber information for the device. In November, 6 months after Nancy's disappearance, the results were returned. The device belonged to Carlo Fuentes Flores, a local painter who had been employed to work on the decks of the main house at Paradise Ranch in the weeks leading up to the crime. The revelation was a profound shock to investigators. Fuentes Flores had been interviewed during the initial neighborhood canvass and had appeared polite, helpful, and entirely unassuming. He had spoken warmly of Nancy, recalling how she had praised his hard work and offered him a tamale. He had no criminal record in either the United States or Mexico and was regarded by his employer as a reliable, skilled craftsman and a dedicated father. Nothing in his background suggested a capacity for extreme violence. Seeking to understand the motivation behind the crime, detectives conducted a comprehensive digital forensic analysis of Fuentes Flores's online activity. The search history revealed a hidden, dark aspect of his life that stood in stark contrast to his public persona. He had engaged in frequent searches for adult entertainment involving older women, reflecting a specific fixation that aligned with the age difference between himself and Nancy. Furthermore, the device contained numerous self-shot videos documenting encounters with various women, exposing a lifestyle of secret relationships, heavy drinking, and high-risk behavior that had placed a strain on his marriage. Despite the compelling location data, investigators required physical evidence to establish an airtight case. They initiated surveillance on Fuentes Flores, utilizing a specialized operations unit to monitor his movements without alerting him to their suspicions. During a lunch outing with his wife at a local restaurant, investigators observed Fuentes Flores consume a soft drink and leave the plastic bottle on the table. Because the item was discarded in a public space. Officers were legally permitted to retrieve it without a warrant. The bottle was immediately dispatched to the laboratory for analysis. The results were definitive. The deoxyribonucleic acid extracted from the beverage bottle matched the genetic profile found in the bloody handprint on the pillow inside Nancy's cottage. With the physical evidence secured, the decision was made to bring Fuentes Flores in for questioning. The interrogation took place at the sheriff's station, conducted by Detective Cole and his partner, Dave. Initially, Fuentes Flores was cooperative and maintained his polite demeanor, repeating his previous assertions that he knew nothing of Nancy's fate and had only used the restrooms on the property during his employment. However, as the detectives systematically presented the evidence detailing their knowledge of his presence on the property during the middle of the night, his composure began to erode. Detectives explained that they possessed undeniable physical proof linking him to the bedroom. Confronted with the reality of the situation, Fuentes Flores's body language shifted dramatically. He gasped, placed his hands over his face, and admitted that he had made a grave mistake. In his initial confession, Fuentes Flores attempted to minimize his culpability by claiming the death was the result of a tragic motor vehicle accident. He asserted that he had returned to the ranch in the early hours of the morning to retrieve a ladder for a subsequent job. While backing his truck up in the darkness, he claimed he had struck Nancy, who had walked behind the vehicle. Panicked, he said he carried her back into the cottage, where she subsequently collapsed. Detectives immediately challenged the plausibility of this account, pointing out that the distribution of blood spatter in the bedroom and the presence of his genetic material on the pillow were entirely inconsistent with a vehicular accident. Under continued questioning, Fuentes Flores abandoned the fabrication and admitted to a far more sinister reality. He confessed that he had consumed a significant amount of alcohol that evening and had traveled to the ranch with the explicit intention of forcing himself upon Nancy. He entered her cottage, assaulted her in her bed, and subsequently raped her. To prevent her from reporting the crime, he used a pillow to suffocate her, holding it over her face until she ceased breathing. He then wrapped her body in her own bedding, loaded her into the bed of his truck, and drove east toward the remote interior of the county. In a dramatic moment during the interrogation, Fuentes Flores offered to lead the detectives to the location where he had concealed Nancy's remains. He was placed in a vehicle and directed investigators on a journey of more than an hour, traveling deep into the arid, desert-like terrain of the Carrizo Plain. The search was fraught with difficulty, as the landscape was vast and features were uniform, causing the suspect to falter and lose his bearings at several locations. Eventually, as the afternoon faded, Detective Cole observed a small, unnatural mound of rocks situated a short distance from a dirt road. Upon approaching the site, investigators discovered human remains that had been partially disturbed by wildlife. Fuentes Flores fell to his knees, weeping and expressing remorse, requesting that the detectives convey an apology to his young daughter. Following the recovery of Nancy's remains, the legal process moved forward. Fuentes Flores was charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances, including rape and burglary, making him eligible for the death penalty. While prosecutors ultimately chose not to seek the death penalty, the defense filed a motion to suppress the recorded confession, arguing that the suspect, as a native Spanish speaker, should have been provided with an interpreter during his interrogation. The judge denied the motion, ruling that the detectives had meticulously preserved his rights and that Fuentes Flores had demonstrated a comprehensive understanding of the English language throughout the process. In January of 2022, rather than proceed with a lengthy and public trial that would subject Nancy's family to further distress, Fuentes Flores entered a slow plea. Under this arrangement, the prosecution presented the compiled evidence to the court, and the judge subsequently found the defendant guilty on all counts. Carlo Fuentes Flores was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Amanda and her family, the resolution of the case brought a measure of justice, though the void left by Nancy's death remained permanent. The Paso Robles community gathered at a local vineyard to celebrate Nancy's life, remembering her as a vibrant, generous woman who lived with a deep love for her family, her faith, and the natural beauty of the Pass of the Oaks. The scripted grief of Camas Valley. In the high mountain valleys of northern Utah, the community of Camas is defined by its rugged beauty and a close-knit, rural lifestyle, surrounded by the majestic peaks of the Uinta Mountains. The residents of Summit County pride themselves on hard work, outdoor recreation, and family values. It is a region where neighbors support one another through harsh winters and celebrate the arrival of spring, a place where crime is rare and the community is deeply connected. Yet in this scenic landscape, a tragedy would occur that would capture national attention, revealing a complex web of ambition, financial desperation, and betrayal. Eric Richens was a 39-year-old resident of Camas, known for his athletic build, dedication to his family, and success as a stonemason. As the owner of C&E Masonry, a highly successful business, Eric had established a reputation for exceptional craftsmanship and a strong work ethic. He was a devoted father to 3 young boys, aged 10, 9, and 6, whom he coached in youth soccer and took on frequent hunting and camping excursions. Raised in the faith of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Eric had served a 2-year mission in Mexico City as a young man, developing a deep sense of spiritual commitment and personal integrity. Eric's wife, Corey, was an equally ambitious individual, growing up in a family that moved frequently due to her parents' construction work. Corey had developed a strong desire for financial security and social standing. As a young woman, working as a cashier at a local home improvement store in Park City, she met Eric, who frequented the business to purchase materials for his masonry projects. The chemistry between them was immediate, and they soon began dating. When Corey became pregnant with their first child, the couple decided to marry. The marriage, however, began with a subtle undercurrent of tension. On the day of their backyard wedding ceremony, Eric's family presented Corey with a prenuptial agreement designed to protect his masonry business. The agreement specified that the business remained Eric's sole property and Corey would only benefit from its assets in the event of his death while they remained married. Although deeply distressed by the timing and nature of the document, Corey ultimately signed it, determined to proceed with the marriage. As the years passed, Corey pursued her own professional aspirations, establishing a real estate company called K. Richens Realty in 2019. Her business focused on purchasing distressed properties, renovating them, and selling them for a profit, a process commonly known as house flipping. By all outward appearances, the couple was thriving. They resided in a beautiful home, drove luxury vehicles, and took frequent family vacations, presenting the image of a successful, modern family. This facade of prosperity was shattered in the early hours of March 4th, 2022. At approximately 3 a.m, Corey contacted emergency services, frantically reporting that her husband had ceased breathing and was cold to the touch. Law enforcement officers, paramedics, and firefighters arrived at the residence to find Eric lying on the floor of the master bedroom. Despite the application of a cardiopulmonary resuscitation machine and the efforts of emergency personnel, Eric possessed no pulse and was officially declared dead at 3:58 a.m. During the initial response, documented by police body-worn cameras, Corey appeared to be in a state of profound shock. She explained to officers that they had been celebrating a major business milestone earlier that evening, the purchase of an unfinished grand mansion in Midway, Utah, which she planned to renovate and sell. To celebrate, she claimed she had prepared a mixed alcoholic beverage for Eric before retiring to sleep in her son's room, as the child was suffering from night terrors. When she returned to the master bedroom in the early hours of the morning, she found her husband unresponsive. The initial observations of the responding emergency medical technicians introduced a note of ambiguity. During chest compressions, a small amount of blood emerged from Eric's mouth, a symptom that led some on the scene to hypothesize that he may have suffered a fatal brain aneurysm. This theory was shared with the family in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, providing a tentative explanation for the sudden death of an otherwise healthy, athletic young man. However, the fragile peace among the surviving family members was short-lived. On the morning following, a gathering of friends and family to reminisce about Eric's life, a confrontation occurred at the residence. Corey, accompanied by a locksmith, attempted to gain access to a safe containing Eric's personal papers, including his will. Eric's sister, Amy, arrived at the property and vehemently objected, asserting that Corey had no legal authority to access the safe. The confrontation escalated into a physical altercation, with Amy alleging that Corey had assaulted her by striking her in the face and neck. law enforcement was summoned and Corey was subsequently arrested and charged with assault, to which she later entered a plea of no contest. In the midst of this turmoil, the estate planner confirmed a devastating piece of news to Corey. In 2020, Eric had secretly altered his estate planning documents, establishing a trust that named his sister Katie as the executor and designating his 3 sons as the sole beneficiaries. The family home, which Corey had resided in for a decade, was included in the trust, effectively cutting her out of the estate. The division between Corey and Eric's family was starkly apparent at the funeral, where the 2 factions sat on opposite sides of the chapel, refusing to communicate. As the months passed, Corey filed a civil lawsuit against Eric's sister, disputing the validity of the trust. Simultaneously, she began to adapt to her new reality as a single mother and grieving widow. Seeking to help her children process their grief, Corey claimed she searched extensively for children's literature addressing the loss of a parent. Finding nothing that met her needs, she decided to write a book herself. Utilizing a professional ghostwriter, she self-published an illustrated children's book titled Are You With Me? The narrative, written from the perspective of a child, wondering if their deceased father is still present in their life, was dedicated to Eric, whom she described as an amazing husband and wonderful father. In March of 2023, a year after Eric's death, Corey engaged in a public relations campaign to promote her book, appearing on local television programs and radio stations. She spoke eloquently about her journey through grief, her love for her children, and her desire to help other families navigating similar tragedies. To the public, she appeared to be a courageous, resilient woman turning a personal catastrophe into a source of support for others. However, behind the scenes, a meticulous forensic investigation was underway. The county medical examiner had conducted an autopsy, and the toxicology report yielded a shocking result. Eric Richins had died from an acute intoxication of fentanyl. The concentration of the drug in his system was 5 times the lethal dose, and the analysis confirmed that the substance was illicitly manufactured rather than pharmaceutical grade, indicating it had been obtained from the street. The autopsy results transformed the case from a sudden death investigation into an active homicide inquiry. Investigators from the Summit County Sheriff's Office secured a search warrant for the Richins residence, seizing electronic devices and searching for evidence of controlled substances, though no physical fentanyl was recovered from the home. When interviewed, Corey expressed shock at the findings, asserting that Eric did not consume illicit drugs. As detectives delved deeper into the couple's history, they uncovered a pattern of financial deception. In 2020, Eric had discovered that Corey had secretly forged his signature to secure a $250,000 line of credit against the home, which he solely owned. This discovery had prompted Eric to consult with a divorce attorney and alter his trust to protect his assets for his children. Although the couple had engaged in counseling and remained together, the trust had been fundamentally compromised. Furthermore, investigators discovered that Corey was facing monumental financial ruin. Her ambitious real estate ventures, specifically the purchase of the multi-million-dollar Midway mansion, had been funded through high-interest, short-term hard money loans. She was millions of dollars in debt, facing foreclosures, and desperately needed access to Eric's estate and life insurance policies to satisfy her creditors. The financial strain had also impacted her personal relationships. Her close friend, Chelsea Barney, had lost her life savings of $45,000 after trusting Corey with a real estate transaction that was never legally finalized, resulting in Chelsea's eviction. Another family, Taryn and Alec Wright, filed a lawsuit alleging that a home purchased from Corey was plagued by toxic mold, leading to financial and physical distress. As the financial motives became clear, investigators also uncovered disturbing allegations regarding prior attempts on Eric's life. Family members and friends recounted an incident during a vacation to Greece in 2019, where Eric became violently ill after consuming a beverage, later telling his sister he suspected Corey had tried to poison him. A more recent incident occurred on Valentine's Day in 2022, just weeks before his death. Corey had purchased a bagel sandwich from a local diner and left it for Eric with a romantic note. After consuming a single bite, Eric suffered a severe physical reaction, requiring the use of his son's emergency epinephrine pen and a significant dose of antihistamines. He later texted a friend, stating, "I think she might have poisoned me." The breakthrough in the criminal investigation came through the analysis of Corey's telephone records. A private investigator hired by the Richens family had identified frequent communications between Corey and a woman named Carmen Lauber, who had a history of drug-related offenses and had performed cleaning services for Corey's real estate business. A specialized detective, Jeff O'Driscoll, took over the case and initiated surveillance on Lauber. Following a search of her residence, which revealed drug paraphernalia and a firearm, Lauber agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a favorable resolution of her own charges. She revealed that Corey had approached her on 2 separate occasions in early 2022, requesting that she procure strong prescription pain medication and, subsequently, illicit fentanyl. Lauber admitted to purchasing the drugs from a local dealer and leaving them at one of Corey's renovation properties for her to retrieve. The timing of these transactions aligned with the Valentine's Day incident and the days immediately preceding Eric's death. On May 8, 2023, Corey Richens was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and multiple counts of possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. The arrest of a children's grief author for the murder of her husband became a global sensation, drawing intense media scrutiny to the small community of Camas. While held in the Summit County Jail, Corey's actions continued to draw suspicion. During a routine search of her cell, corrections officers discovered a 4-page handwritten letter addressed to her mother, containing instructions for her brother, Ronnie, to testify that Eric had obtained pain medication and fentanyl during a trip to Mexico. The prosecution argued this was clear evidence of witness tampering, while the defense maintained the letter was a draft of a fictional manuscript. In March of 2024, prosecutors amended the charges to include attempted murder in connection with the Valentine's Day bagel incident. They also uncovered evidence of a long-term secret affair between Corey and a handyman named Josh Grossman. Text messages exchanged between the two in February of 2022 revealed Corey expressing deep dissatisfaction with her marriage, writing to Grossman that if Eric could just go away, their lives would be perfect. The trial of Corey Richens commenced in a packed courtroom. The prosecution, led by Brad Bloodworth, presented a detailed narrative of financial desperation, secret drug purchases, and romantic obsession. They called numerous witnesses, including Eric's sister Katie, who delivered an emotional testimony about the loss of her brother, and Carmen Lauber, who detailed her role in procuring the fatal drugs. The most anticipated witness was Josh Grossman. He appeared on the stand visibly uncomfortable, slouched, and emotional as his private, romantic text messages were displayed to the court. He testified to his affection for Corey but revealed a chilling conversation that occurred after Eric's death. While sitting in her vehicle, Corey had asked Grossman if he had ever killed anyone during his military service in Iraq and subsequently asked how it made him feel. Following 13 days of prosecution testimony, the defense delivered a stunning tactical decision. Rather than presenting their planned witnesses, Corey's defense attorneys rested their case immediately, asserting that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt how the fentanyl had actually been administered to Eric. The jury, however, was not swayed by the defense's argument. After deliberating for less than 3 hours, the 8-member panel returned with a unanimous verdict. Corey Richens was found guilty of aggravated murder and all remaining charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her parental rights were terminated, and her 3 sons were adopted by Eric's sister. The story of the grieving widow who wrote her own narrative of loss ended in a courtroom where the pursuit of truth ultimately prevailed over a carefully crafted fiction. The Echoes on Oakley Street. The city of Evansville, Indiana, situated along the scenic bends of the Ohio River, is a community where tradition and public service are deeply valued. Among the city's most respected institutions is its fire department, a close-knit fraternity of men and women who risk their lives to protect their fellow citizens. To the people of Evansville, a firefighter is more than an employee. They are a symbol of courage and community spirit. It was within this dedicated circle of first responders that a shocking act of violence would occur, initiating a complex investigation that would test the resolve of local law enforcement and expose a tragic betrayal. Robert Dorr was a veteran firefighter who had served the Evansville Fire Department with distinction for 28 years. At 49 years of age, Robbie, as he was known to his friends and colleagues, was a respected leader, a mentor to young recruits, and a heroic figure who had once been photographed rescuing a child from a burning building, following the family tradition established by his father, who had also been a firefighter. Robbie lived a life dedicated to service. To support his family, he frequently worked secondary jobs, including managing a local fast food restaurant. It was at this restaurant that Robbie met Elizabeth Fox, a woman who had experienced a life of significant adversity, adopted into a foster home at a young age alongside her sister, Mandy. Elizabeth had struggled to find stability, entering into 5 previous marriages before finding a sense of security with Robbie. Drawn to her warmth, Robbie pursued a relationship, eventually marrying Elizabeth in a beautiful beachside ceremony in Panama City, Florida, in the summer of 2018. For the first few months, the marriage appeared to be a success. Robbie embraced his role as a stepfather to Elizabeth's 3 children, while Elizabeth settled into her life as a homemaker. However, beneath the surface, financial pressures and mutual suspicions began to erode the relationship. Robbie, who had financed a new vehicle, furniture, and appliances shortly after their wedding, found himself heavily burdened by debt. He expressed insecurity regarding Elizabeth's frequent use of her cellular phone, noting that she routinely deleted her text messages and call logs, leading him to suspect infidelity. These tensions culminated on the cold evening of February 26, 2019. Robbie arrived at his residence on Oakley Street after completing a 12-hour shift at the fire station. As his truck pulled into the driveway, Elizabeth was inside preparing dinner. Within moments of his arrival, a series of rapid popping sounds echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Elizabeth contacted emergency services, frantically reporting that her husband had been shot in the driveway. Responding officers and emergency medical technicians arrived to find Robbie lying on the concrete with multiple gunshot wounds, including a fatal wound to the head. Despite immediate efforts to administer cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Robbie possessed no pulse and was pronounced deceased at the scene. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Evansville community, particularly within the ranks of the fire department. Firefighters rushed to the scene, their grief and anger palpable as they realized one of their own had been gunned down in his own driveway. A solemn procession of fire trucks escorted Robbie's body to the coroner's office, their flashing lights illuminating the dark streets of the city. The initial assessment of the crime scene yielded little immediate evidence. No shell casings were recovered, suggesting the shooter had used a revolver or had meticulously collected the casings before fleeing. However, during the autopsy, the forensic pathologist recovered a unique mixture of ammunition from Robbie's body, including jacketed projectiles, ball ammunition, and plastic shotgun wadding. A firearms expert identified the weapon capable of firing such diverse ammunition as a Taurus judge, a distinct revolver often referred to as a hand cannon. This critical piece of forensic evidence provided investigators with a specific target. They discovered that a Taurus judge revolver had recently been reported stolen from a local pawn shop, River City Pawn. A review of the shop's records and social media activity revealed that an employee, Larry Richmond Jr., had photographed himself with a matching revolver before it was reported missing. Further investigation into Richmond Jr.'s background revealed a significant connection. His father, Larry Richmond Sr., was a convicted felon who had served 20 years in prison for a previous murder conviction and was currently on probation. Richmond Sr. was in a romantic relationship with Elizabeth's sister, Mandy, and resided in a home nearby. With this web of connections established, investigators from the Evansville Police Department initiated a coordinated effort to interview all key individuals simultaneously. Following Robbie's massive public funeral, which was attended by hundreds of first responders, detectives brought Elizabeth, Larry Richmond Sr., Larry Richmond Jr., and Mandy in for questioning. The interviews revealed a series of profound inconsistencies. Elizabeth maintained that she had been inside preparing dinner and had only run outside after hearing the gunshots. However, a forensic analysis of her cellular phone records revealed a critical detail: a 4-minute and 18-second telephone call from Larry Richmond Sr. had occurred just minutes before she called 911. This call had been systematically deleted from her phone's internal log, though it remained visible on the carrier's records. Confronted with this evidence, Elizabeth admitted to deleting the call, claiming she did so to prevent investigators from suspecting she was having an affair with her sister's fiancé. She vehemently denied any involvement in Robbie's murder, but her deception regarding the communication led to her immediate arrest and charge of obstruction of justice. Simultaneously, Larry Richmond Jr. provided investigators with a crucial lead. Seeking to distance himself from his father's actions, Richmond Jr. revealed that Richmond Sr. had concealed a collection of firearms in a plastic container buried in the backyard of Mandy's residence. Surveillance. Video retrieved from a neighboring property confirmed that Richmond Sr. had traveled into the backyard with a shovel and a container during the evening hours. Detectives executed a search warrant at Mandy's home, excavating the backyard and recovering several firearms from a buried plastic box. Although the specific Taurus judge used in the murder was not among the recovered weapons, the discovery established that Richmond Sr. was in possession of multiple illegal firearms, resulting in federal weapons charges. As the investigation continued, further evidence of a conspiracy emerged. Robbie's daughter, Lindsay, discovered a handwritten note slipped inside a condolence card presented by Mandy and Richmond Sr. The note, written on a torn piece of notebook paper, read, "We need to talk," and included Richmond Sr.'s telephone number. This attempt to establish contact with Elizabeth in the immediate aftermath of the murder heightened investigators' suspicions. Furthermore, witnesses and digital evidence confirmed that Elizabeth and Larry Richmond Sr. had been engaged in a secret romantic affair, which had been witnessed by Richmond Jr. Investigators also learned that Elizabeth had inquired about Robbie's firefighter pension and life insurance policies on the day following his death, suggesting a financial motive for the crime. Despite the compelling circumstantial evidence, the investigation faced a significant delay as digital forensics experts worked to bypass the passcode security on Richmond Sr.'s seized iPhone. It was not until several months later that specialized software successfully extracted the device's location data. The recovered data provided a definitive timeline of the night of the murder. The location points demonstrated that Richmond Sr.'s device had been active in the immediate vicinity of the Dorr residence for nearly an hour prior to the shooting, positioned in a nearby alley. The device was powered off minutes before the shooting and powered back on at a nearby convenience store shortly after, where video surveillance captured Richmond Sr. dressed in a sleeveless T-shirt despite the cold February temperature. With this comprehensive evidence, prosecutors secured murder and conspiracy charges against both Elizabeth Fox Dorr and Larry Richmond Sr. Elizabeth's trial proceeded first, where her own son, Nathan, delivered a devastating testimony regarding her frequent inquiries about Robbie's pension. The jury found her guilty of murder and conspiracy, and she was subsequently sentenced to 90 years in prison. Larry Richmond Sr.'s trial followed, featuring testimony from a former cellmate, Muhammad, who revealed that Richmond Sr. had confessed to the murder, stating that eliminating Robbie would allow him to secure Elizabeth and financial benefits. The jury returned a verdict of guilty, and Richmond Sr. was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The resolution of the case brought a somber sense of closure to Robbie's children and the Evansville Fire Department, who dedicated a new fire engine in his honor. The legacy of a dedicated public servant was preserved, while the individuals who conspired to end his life were held fully accountable under the law. The cold waters of Huron County. The agricultural lands of Huron County, Ohio, are home to quiet, industrious communities where generations of families have farmed the soil and worked the railroads. In towns like Willard, life moves at a deliberate pace and the safety of the community is taken for granted. It is a place where people look out for one another, and the sudden disappearance of a neighbor is an event of profound concern. In this rural environment, a young mother's life would be cut short, initiating a 24-year quest for justice that would span counties, involve complex forensic technology, and ultimately unmask a calculated perpetrator. Regina Rowe Hicks was a high-spirited, independent 25-year-old resident of Willard, known for her love of country music, outdoor activities, and her signature white Chevrolet Camaro. Regina was a devoted mother to her 4-year-old son, Montana. In her youth, she met Paul Hicks, a local railroad foreman whom she married. The marriage, however, was marked by control and emotional abuse, with Paul seeking to restrict Regina's contact with her friends and family. The dynamics of the relationship shifted dramatically in the summer of 2001, when a fire destroyed the couple's residence. Although the fire was determined to be accidental, the subsequent $60,000 insurance settlement provided Regina with the financial independence she needed to leave her husband. She purchased her beloved white Camaro, filed for divorce, and began to build a new life, entering into a relationship with a new boyfriend. This newfound independence was tragically interrupted on the evening of October 18, 2001. Regina was scheduled to pick up Montana from Paul at the residence of his lifelong friend, Stephen Gates. When she failed to arrive or return to her mother's home, her family immediately recognized that her disappearance was entirely uncharacteristic. 4 days later, a local farmer observed an unusual object submerged in a pond on his property. Emergency services and Huron County Sheriff's deputies arrived to find Regina's white Camaro resting in the deep water. Divers retrieved her body from the passenger seat of the vehicle, her feet tucked beneath the console. The physical evidence within the vehicle immediately suggested foul play. The driver's seat was pushed far back, indicating a much taller individual had operated the vehicle, and the car was engaged in second gear with the driver's window down. The autopsy revealed that Regina had suffered 3 blunt force strikes to her scalp, which had incapacitated her, and the presence of pond water in her airway confirmed she was alive but unconscious when the vehicle was submerged. Paul Hicks was immediately identified as a person of interest as he was engaged in a bitter custody dispute and strongly opposed paying child support. However, without direct forensic evidence or witness testimony placing him at the pond, the investigation stalled. Regina's mother, Lacella, campaigned tirelessly for justice, erecting billboards and contacting media outlets, but she passed away from cancer before the case could be resolved, leaving the murder an unsolved cold case for more than a decade. The catalyst for a breakthrough occurred in June of 2015 in Claremont County, nearly 100 miles away. A massive fire destroyed a residential investment property owned by Paul Hicks, while Paul possessed an alibi, claiming to be in a hotel hours away for his railroad job. The home's surveillance system, preserved in a fireproof safe, captured the arsonists. The video depicted a man and a woman clad in protective suits pouring gasoline throughout the residence. The woman's face and long, curly blonde hair were clearly visible as she looked directly into the camera. Paul immediately identified the female arsonist as his ex-girlfriend, Kelly, with whom he was engaged in a bitter child custody battle. Kelly was subsequently arrested on an outstanding warrant. However, a meticulous civil investigation led by insurance attorney Zach McCune and local detectives revealed a shocking conspiracy. A forensic analysis of Cellular records demonstrated that the hundreds of harassing calls Paul claimed to have received